Hey, everybody, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be taking a look at Save Your Retirement by Paul B. Brown and Frank Armstrong.
Oh,
And hopefully by the end of this, you're going to feel a little bit better about planning for retirement,
yeah.
even if right now maybe it kind of freaks you out.
Yeah, it's understandable to feel a little overwhelmed when it comes to retirement. I mean, especially after things like the 2008 market crash.
Oh, yeah.
But the good news is that taking action is really the best way to combat that fear.
So true knowledge is power. Okay, so this book, Save Your Retirement, was written right after that 2008 meltdown.
Right.
And the author, Paul B. Brown, has been dealing with personal finance for a long time. He actually says more years than he'd care to admit. But one of the things that really stood out to me in this book was that 3 out of every 10 people hadn't saved anything for retirement
Wow.
as of 2008.
Yeah, that's a pretty startling statistic, and it shows just how important this topic is. A lot of people are in the same boat if you're feeling behind.
Right.
But it also emphasized the fact that we need to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Any step, no matter how small.
Totally. So no matter where you are in planning for retirement, we're going to try to unpack some of the best advice from this book. And hopefully you can take some action on this stuff. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think a good place to start is with this idea that most people really underestimate how much money they'll need in retirement.
Yeah.
It's easy to think, oh, I'll spend less when I retire.
Yeah.
But then unexpected things come up. Healthcare costs,
Yeah.
inflation, travel, all these things add up.
We've all heard those jokes about eating cat food in retirement.
Right.
No one wants that to happen to them.
No.
This book actually gives us a really simple rule of thumb to keep in mind when we're thinking about planning how much money we're going to need.
What's that?
So they recommend that you plan on needing 100% of your current income in retirement.
100%.
Yeah, I know it sounds like a lot,
Yeah.
but it's better to overestimate than to underestimate.
Okay.
And, you want to enjoy retirement, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a time to enjoy yourself, travel, do the things you love.
For sure.
You don't want to be pinching pennies. It reminds me of that Henny Youngman joke.
Oh, yeah?
The doctor gave me 6 months to live, but when I couldn't pay the bill, he gave me 6 more months.
That's a good one.
It's funny because it's true. Putting things off doesn't make the problem go away.
Exactly. So speaking of not putting things off, one of the biggest advantages you have is time.
Yeah.
And the power of compound interest.
That's right.
The book even quotes Einstein saying that compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe.
Oh, wow. I never thought about Einstein and retirement, but it makes sense.
It really does. And to give you an example, the book talks about a couple who invest $10,000 a year for 40 years.
Okay.
Now, with an average return of 8%, they end up with over $2.5 million.
Wow.
But if they had started just 5 years later,
Okay.
they would have ended up with almost $900,000 less,
That's crazy.
even though they only put in $50,000 less overall.
Just from that 5-year difference.
Yeah, so even small amounts invested consistently over time can really add up.
That's wild. Okay, so what about someone listening who hasn't started saving yet, or they have debt? What do they do?
Great question. The authors are really clear about this.
Okay.
You need to tackle high-interest debt, especially credit cards,
Okay.
before you even think about investing. They call credit card debt a slow-acting poison because of those crazy high interest rates.
Oh, yeah. They compare it to swimming a mile with 20 pounds of lead weight strapped to your ankles.
Exactly.
That's a good analogy.
It really is. You're not setting yourself up for success.
Right.
They also give a really interesting example. A typical $5,000 credit card balance, if you're only making minimum payments, can take 31 years to pay off.
Wow.
And on top of that, you end up paying more in interest than the original debt.
So 31 years? That's longer than some mortgages.
Right. It's
Yeah.
wild. So they say focus on paying down that debt.
Makes sense.
It might mean making some sacrifices in the short term,
Yeah.
but it's going to free up so much financial breathing room.
So get rid of the debt first before you can even think about
Yeah,
building up your retirement savings.
exactly.
It's step 1.
Right.
Okay, so that's some really great advice. But what about if you haven't started saving yet or you're not sure where you stand? Does this book give you any ideas about how to even figure that out?
It does.
Okay.
They have something called the R-minus timeline,
Okay.
and they break it down into stages based on how many years you have until retirement.
Okay.
So we've got R20, R15, R10, all the way to R00, which is the moment you hit retirement.
Okay, so it's like a roadmap based on where you are.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with someone who's maybe 20 years away from retirement.
Okay.
What are some of the key things they should be thinking about?
So at this stage, you want to focus on laying the foundation, figure out how much you'll realistically need, and then use that to determine how much you need to save each month or each year. There are a ton of online calculators that can help you do this.
Okay.
And they even mention a few in the book.
So have a goal in mind.
Yeah.
Don't just save blindly. But I imagine that at this stage, a lot of people are juggling things like saving for a house or their kids' education.
Absolutely.
So how do you balance all of that?
It is a juggling act, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's important to prioritize your goals.
Yeah.
And be realistic about what you can afford.
Right.
Delaying retirement savings can snowball and be hard to overcome later on.
Right. It's so easy to say, I'll catch up later.
Totally.
But, as we get older, life gets more complicated.
Absolutely. And the authors bring up a good point.
Okay.
Most of us tend to spend whatever's in our checking account.
Yeah, that's true.
So they recommend automating your savings.
Okay.
Set up automatic contributions to a 401k or an IRA. That way you don't even have to think about it.
Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So let's fast forward a little bit.
Okay.
Let's say we're about 15 years away from retirement.
Okay.
What kind of changes should we be thinking about at that point?
At this stage, it's all about taking stock of where you are and maybe ramping up those savings efforts. Okay.
So you want to understand how much you're projected to get from Social Security and any pensions that you might have?
Okay, so that's where I start to feel a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like 15 years out, Social Security still feels really far away.
It does, but the authors have some great advice here.
Okay.
They say to start familiarizing yourself with the Social Security website, SEI.gov.
Okay.
They have a benefits calculator where you can put in your information and get a personalized estimate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, based on your work history and earnings.
Wow. So I can actually see what my Social Security checks might be.
You can.
That's pretty cool.
It helps paint a clearer picture of your future income streams so you can plan for any shortfalls.
That actually makes me feel a lot less stressed about it. So at this point, we're 15 years out. We're really just trying to figure out what our future income streams are going to look like from Social Security and any other sources we might have, just so we can make sure that our savings are on track.
Right.
Okay, so let's get even closer to retirement. Let's say we're 10 years out. What should we be doing then? So this stage gets even more tailored to your situation.
Okay.
Now remember, the book was written in 2008, right after that financial crisis. And they acknowledge that you might still be feeling a bit shell-shocked if your retirement savings took a hit back then.
Yeah. I mean, even though you know that the markets go up and down, it's still really scary to see your savings drop like that.
It is. They emphasize that while it's understandable to panic, action is key. Don't make any rash decisions based on fear, like selling off all your investments when the market is down.
Right. You're just locking in your losses at that point.
Exactly. You've got to maintain that long-term perspective.
Right.
Remember, historically, the markets have always recovered from downturns.
Yeah.
Patience is key.
Okay. So stay the course.
Yeah.
Don't panic.
Right.
But what kind of actions should you be taking at this point?
Well, they introduce a concept called a glide path for your investments. So as you get closer to retirement, they recommend gradually shifting a larger portion of your portfolio from stocks to more conservative things like bonds.
So you're basically decreasing your risk.
Exactly.
But doesn't that mean you're also accepting lower returns?
It's a balancing act for sure. But they also bring up a really important point.
What's that?
Even things like cash in a savings account can lose value if inflation is high enough.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Even if you're earning interest, you're not keeping pace with inflation.
Exactly.
So you're still losing money, essentially.
Yeah. So even though you're moving to a more conservative portfolio, you still need to allow for some growth.
To beat inflation.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
So it's all about managing the risk.
Right.
Okay, what else is important at this stage?
So they also emphasize diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. Yeah.
Spread out your investments across different assets.
Oh.
Stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, even foreign markets.
So don't just put everything into the S&P 500. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
But that part always makes me a little nervous. Like, where do you even begin?
Well, they actually provide some resources in the book, including asset allocation models and specific funds you could consider. They even break it down by portfolio size.
Oh, that's great.
So whether you're starting small or you have a larger amount to invest, there's something for you.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, it sounds like we're planning ahead.
Yes.
We're diversifying our investments.
Right.
And we're not panicking when the market fluctuates.
The right way.
So what happens when we actually hit retirement? That's a whole different ballgame, right?
It is. And, even with all the planning in the world,
Yeah.
you might still find yourself thinking, now what?
Yeah, like what do I actually do now?
Exactly.
I can imagine feeling that way.
Yeah.
Does this book help us deal with that?
It does.
Okay.
And it starts with something really practical, revisiting your budget.
Okay, so even though you've retired, you still have to budget.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not earning a regular paycheck anymore, so you need to manage that money wisely.
So that 4% rule we talked about is really important at this stage.
Absolutely.
Right, making sure you don't withdraw more than 4% each year so your money lasts.
Exactly.
Okay, but is retirement just all about numbers?
That's where the book takes an interesting turn.
Okay.
They say that retirement is not just about finances. It's about figuring out what you actually want to do.
Right.
What are you passionate about? What have you always wanted to try but you never had the time for?
I love that. So it's about thriving in retirement.
Yes.
Not just surviving financially.
Exactly.
And they give a really good tip about this.
They do.
What's that?
They say to test drive your retirement activities now before you actually retire.
Oh, that's interesting.
If you're thinking about volunteering, start volunteering now.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about traveling, take a trip.
Right.
See if you actually enjoy those things.
Love that. So you're designing your retirement.
Exactly.
Instead of just letting it happen. That's really smart.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of things that we don't always like to think about.
Yeah.
This book also talks about long-term care.
Uh-huh.
Which is something that a lot of retirees are going to have to deal with.
It is. What do they say about that? They acknowledge that it's expensive and it's usually not fully covered by Medicare.
Right.
They even give some statistics about the average costs of nursing homes and assisted living facilities.
And I imagine those numbers are pretty scary.
They are.
So planning for that is just as important as
It is.
planning for those everyday expenses.
Absolutely.
But what else did they say?
So they really stress the importance of researching long-term care insurance options early on and understanding the different levels of care that are available.
Okay.
It's a complex topic,
Yeah.
and they actually recommend consulting with a specialist.
Okay, so plan ahead
Yes.
and talk to an expert.
Right.
Okay, so one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book
Yeah,
was this idea of rethinking retirement altogether.
totally.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they challenge that traditional idea of retirement as completely stopping working and earning an income.
Okay.
They suggest maybe working part-time consulting or even starting your own business.
So you're staying engaged and
Yeah.
mentally stimulated,
Right.
even though you're not working a traditional job?
Exactly. And they mention that more people in their 50s and 60s are starting businesses now than ever before.
That's so cool.
It is.
So retirement doesn't have to be the end.
It doesn't.
It can be like a new beginning.
Exactly.
So we've talked about a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Tackling debt,
Right.
automating savings,
Yeah.
diversifying investments,
Yeah.
and even rethinking retirement.
Totally.
But I think we should probably talk about Social Security.
Definitely.
It's something that everyone has questions about.
They do.
Does this book help us understand that better?
It does. They emphasize that even though there are a lot of debates about its future, it's still a very significant source of income for most retirees. They encourage everyone to go to the Social Security website and use their calculators to get an estimate of their benefits.
That website is amazing.
It is.
It answers so many questions.
Right.
But the book does talk about some of the challenges that Social Security is facing, right?
It does. Like
Right.
what things like the aging population and the fact that we have fewer workers for every retiree,
Right.
and that's putting a strain on the system.
So it's not all good news.
No, it's not.
What do they say about what we can do?
Well, even though we can't control those bigger issues,
Right.
we can control our own planning.
Okay.
So understand how Social Security works, get an estimate of your benefits, and factor that into your overall retirement plan.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
You're taking control of your own retirement,
Exactly.
even if things are uncertain.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Save Your Retirement.
We have.
It's definitely been a reality check for me.
Uh-huh.
But I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from it is that planning,
Yes.
taking action,
Right.
and having a long-term perspective are key.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. Retirement might seem really far away for some people,
Yeah,
but the sooner you start planning and taking action, the better off you'll be.
that's right. And remember, it's not just about the money.
Yeah.
It's about creating a future that you can really enjoy.
Exactly.
I love that. Well, hopefully this deep dive has given you some information and some motivation to start taking those next steps,
I hope so.
whatever that might be for you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's tackling some debt,
Yes.
setting up automatic savings,
Mhm.
or even just exploring those retirement activities,
Totally.
like we talked about with the test drive.
Exactly. Every step, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction.
I like that.
Yeah.
So the authors of this book ask a really interesting question at the end.
What's that?
What is one thing you can do this week,
Okay.
based on what we discussed, to get a better grip on your retirement planning?
That's a good one.
Take some time to think about it, and then make a plan.
And take action.
Your future self will thank you for it.
For sure.
And that's it for this deep dive into Save Your Retirement. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time for part 2.
See you then. Yeah, it is a juggling act for sure. But it's about prioritizing.
Yeah.
And being realistic about what you can afford. Delaying retirement savings can have a snowball effect later on.
Oh, it's so easy to say, I'll catch up later. But then life just gets in the way. And the authors bring up a really good point here.
Okay.
Most of us are wired to spend whatever's in our checking account.
Right.
So their advice is to automate your savings.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Set up automatic contributions to your 401k or your IRA.
Right.
So you don't even have to think about it.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. Let's say we're about 15 years away from retirement. What are we thinking about then?
Well, at this stage, it's about taking stock of where you stand and maybe ramping up your savings efforts.
Okay.
It's also important to understand your projected income from things like Social Security or any pensions you might have.
See, that's where I would get a little intimidated. 15 years out, Social Security still feels kind of abstract.
Right, I get it. But the authors have some great advice here.
Okay.
They say to start familiarizing yourself with the Social Security website,
Okay.
sa.gov.
Okay.
They have a benefits calculator where you can put in your information and get a personalized estimate.
Oh, really? So I can actually see like what my Social Security checks might be
You can.
15 years from now?
Yeah, based on your work history and your earnings.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. It makes me feel a little less stressed about it.
Okay.
So at this R15 stage, we're basically just trying to figure out what our income's going to look like from Social Security and any other sources we might have,
Exactly.
just to make sure our savings plan is still on track.
Right.
Okay, so let's get even closer to retirement. Let's say 10 years out. What are we doing then?
At this stage, it gets even more tailored to your specific circumstances.
Okay.
Now, remember, this book was written after the 2008 financial crisis, and they acknowledge that you might still be feeling a bit shell-shocked
Yeah.
if your retirement savings took a hit during that time.
Oh, yeah. Even though I know intellectually that the markets go up and down, it's still really scary when you see your savings drop that much.
Absolutely. But they emphasize that while panic is understandable, action is key.
Okay.
Don't make any rash decisions out of fear, like selling all of your investments when the market is down.
Right, because then you're locking in those losses.
Exactly. You got to maintain that long-term perspective.
Right.
Remember, markets historically recover from downturns.
Yeah.
Patience is a virtue.
So don't panic.
Yeah.
Stay the course.
Yeah.
But what kind of actions should someone be taking at this point, 10 years out?
Well, they talk about a glide path for your investments.
Okay.
And as you get closer to retirement, they recommend shifting a larger portion of your portfolio from stocks to more conservative options like bonds.
Okay, so you're decreasing your risk as you get closer to retirement, but doesn't that also mean accepting lower returns?
It's a balancing act. But they make a really good point here.
Okay.
Even supposedly safe investments like cash in a savings account can lose value if inflation is high enough.
That's right. Even if you're earning interest, you might not be keeping up with inflation.
Exactly.
So you could still be losing purchasing power.
Right. So even though you're moving towards a more conservative portfolio as you get closer to retirement, you still want to allow for some growth.
To outpace inflation.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not about eliminating risk completely,
No.
but it's about managing it.
Right.
Okay, what else should we be thinking about at this stage?
Well, they also talk about diversification.
Right, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Spread out your investments
Okay.
across different asset classes. So not just stocks and bonds, but things like real estate, commodities, even foreign markets.
Okay, so don't just put all your money into like the S&P 500.
Right?
Diversify a little bit.
Right.
Okay, diversification. That part always stresses me out a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, where do I even begin?
Well, the good news is they provide some really helpful resources in the book,
Oh, good.
including suggested asset allocation models and specific funds you can consider.
Okay,
They even break it down by portfolio size.
that's amazing.
So whether you're starting small or you have a larger amount to invest, there's guidance for you.
Okay, that's really helpful. So it sounds like we're planning ahead, we're diversifying our investments, and we're not panicking when the markets go crazy.
Right.
But what happens when we actually hit retirement? That's a whole other thing, right?
It is. And even with all the planning in the world,
Yeah.
you might still find yourself thinking, now what?
Yeah, what am I supposed to do with all this time?
Exactly.
Does this book help with that at all?
It does. And it starts with something really practical.
Okay.
Revisiting your budget.
Oh, even though you're retired, you still have to budget.
You do. You're not earning a regular paycheck anymore.
Right.
You've got to manage that money wisely.
So that 4% rule is really important at this stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Make sure you're not withdrawing more than 4% of your savings each year.
So that it lasts.
Yeah.
Okay, so is retirement just all about the numbers?
Well, that's where the book takes a really interesting turn.
Okay. I like it when they get philosophical.
Me too.
Huh.
They say retirement isn't just about finances.
Okay.
It's about figuring out what you actually want to do with this next chapter of your life.
I love that.
Yeah.
What are your passions? What have you always wanted to try but you never had the time for?
Exactly.
Okay, so you're not just surviving financially, you're actually thriving.
Yes.
And they give a really interesting tip about this.
What's that?
They say to test drive your retirement activities now before you actually retire.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So if you're thinking about volunteering, start doing it now.
Right.
If you want to travel, take a trip.
Yeah, see if you actually enjoy those things.
So you're designing your ideal retirement.
Exactly.
Instead of just kind of letting it happen.
Right.
Okay, so speaking of things we don't always like to think about, this book also talks about long-term care.
Yes.
Which is something that, unfortunately, a lot of retirees have to face.
It is, and they acknowledge that it's expensive and a lot of times not fully covered by Medicare.
Right.
They even give some statistics about the average costs of nursing homes and assisted living facilities.
And I imagine those numbers are pretty scary.
They are.
So planning for that is just as important as planning for your everyday expenses.
Absolutely. What else do they say?
Well, they stress the importance of researching long-term care insurance options early on.
Okay.
And understanding the different levels of care that are available.
Got it.
Because it's a really complex topic.
It is.
They recommend consulting with a specialist.
Okay.
To get some help with that.
Okay.
So plan ahead.
Yes.
And talk to an expert.
Right.
Okay, so one of the things that really resonated with me in this book was this whole idea of rethinking retirement altogether.
Yeah.
Like, what do they mean by that?
So they challenge this idea of retirement as a sudden stop to working and earning an income. They suggest things like maybe working part-time, doing some consulting, or even starting a new business.
Oh, wow. So you're staying engaged.
Yeah.
Keeping your mind sharp.
Right.
Even if you're not working a traditional 9-to-5 anymore.
Exactly. And they actually mention that more people in their 50s and 60s are starting businesses now than ever before.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
It is.
So retirement doesn't have to be the end.
It doesn't.
It can be new beginning.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things. Tackling debt, automating your savings, diversifying your investments, and even rethinking what retirement looks like. But I think we should probably address the elephant in the room, Social Security.
Yes, we should.
Everyone's got questions about it.
They do.
Does the book make any sense of it?
It tries to. They start by saying that even though there are these ongoing debates about its future, it's still a major source of income for most retirees.
It is.
And they encourage people to visit the Social Security Administration website and use their calculators to get a personalized estimate of their benefits.
Yeah, that website is so helpful.
It is.
It's a really good resource.
Right.
But they do acknowledge that Social Security is facing some challenges.
They do. Like what? Well, things like the aging population and the fact that there are fewer workers for every retiree.
Right.
That puts a strain on the system.
So it's not all good news.
It's not.
Is there anything we could do about it?
Well, even though we can't control those bigger issues, we can control our own planning.
Okay.
So understanding how Social Security works, getting an estimate of your benefits, and factoring that into your retirement plan can make a big difference.
That's a really good point. So even though there's uncertainty, you're still taking responsibility for your own retirement.
Exactly. It is. And they actually emphasize that you need to revisit your budget.
Really?
Yeah.
So even in retirement, you still have to budget.
You do, because remember, you're not earning a regular paycheck anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
You've got to make that money last.
All right. So that 4% rule we talked about is super important here.
Absolutely.
Making sure you don't take out more than 4% of your savings every year.
Exactly.
But is retirement really just all about numbers?
That's where this book gets really interesting. They say that retirement isn't just about your finances. It's about figuring out what you want to do with this next stage of your life.
That's a good point.
What are you passionate about? What did you always want to do but never had time for?
Yeah, like what are your dreams?
Right.
Okay, I love that. So it's not just about surviving financially, but
Mm,
really thriving.
exactly.
And they actually give a really good tip about this.
What's that?
They say to test drive your retirement activities before you retire.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if you're thinking about volunteering, start volunteering now.
Eh,
If you want to travel the world, take a trip and see if you actually like it.
That's a great idea.
So you're basically designing your retirement
You are.
instead of just letting it happen to you. That's smart.
Yeah.
Okay, so this book also talks about something that's not always fun to think about, long-term care.
Yeah.
It's something that a lot of retirees are going to have to deal with, unfortunately.
They are. And the authors acknowledge that it can be really expensive
Uh-huh.
and often not covered by Medicare.
Right.
They actually give some statistics about the average cost of things like nursing homes
Oh, yeah.
and assisted living facilities.
I bet those numbers are pretty scary.
They are. It emphasizes the need to plan ahead.
Yeah. So it's just as important as planning for your everyday expenses.
Absolutely. What else do they say?
Well, they really highlight the importance of researching long-term care insurance options early
Okay.
and understanding the different types of care that are out there.
Right, because it can be really complicated.
It is. They recommend talking to a specialist to get some help with that.
Okay, so plan ahead
Yeah,
and talk to an expert.
exactly. Okay, so one of the things that I really liked about this book was how they encourage us to rethink retirement completely.
Yeah.
What do they mean by that?
Well, they challenge that traditional idea that retirement means you just suddenly stop working.
Okay.
They suggest things like working part-time or doing some consulting
Yeah.
or even starting a whole new business.
Wow. So you're staying active and engaged?
Yeah, keeping your mind sharp.
Even if you're not working a typical 9 to 5?
Exactly. And they mention that more and more people in their 50s and 60s are starting businesses these days.
Really? That's so cool.
It is.
Retirement doesn't have to be the end of your career.
It doesn't. It can be a brand new beginning.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things. Tackling debt,
Right.
automating savings,
Yeah.
diversifying our investments, and even rethinking retirement altogether.
Totally.
But I think it's time to address the big one, Social Security.
Definitely. It's something that everybody has questions about.
Yeah. Does this book help us understand it any better?
It does. They start by emphasizing that even with all the debates about its future, Social Security is still a major source of income for most retirees.
Yeah.
And they really encourage everyone to visit the Social Security website and use their calculators to get an estimate of their benefits based on their work history.
Yeah, that website's a lifesaver.
Yes.
I've used it myself. It's a great resource.
But the book does point out that Social Security's got some challenges ahead.
Yeah, like what?
Things like the aging population and the fact that there are fewer workers for every retiree.
Yeah.
It puts a strain on the system.
So it's not all good news.
Unfortunately not.
Is there anything we can do about it?
Well, you can't really control those larger issues,
Right.
but you can control your own planning.
Okay.
So understanding how Social Security works, getting an estimate of your benefits, and making sure that's part of your overall retirement plan.
So taking responsibility for your own retirement.
Exactly.
Even though the future is uncertain.
Right.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Save Your Retirement. It's been a lot to think about.
It has.
But the biggest takeaways for me are planning, taking action, and having a long-term perspective.
I agree with that. Retirement might seem far off for some people,
Oh, yeah.
but the sooner you start planning and taking those steps, the better prepared you'll be.
Absolutely. And it's not all about the money either.
No, it's not.
It's about creating a future that you can really enjoy.
Exactly. A future where you can pursue your passions, spend time with loved ones, and make the most of this next chapter.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this question from the book. What is one thing you can do this week, based on what we've discussed, to get a better handle on your own retirement planning? Take some time to think about it, make a plan, and then take action. Your future self will thank you.
Absolutely.
And that's it for our deep dive into Save Your Retirement. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into a new book.
See you then.